morning. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to this, another program in the series, Addiction and Recovery. I'm your host, Ramnaris Dwarika, and I want to say hello to all our listeners, both in Trinidad and Tobago, worldwide, on the net, on the various platforms that you are listening. And I would also like to let our listeners, our brothers and sisters out there know that this is an interactive program. And you can call the numbers on your screen at a 663-2335 or 663-1027. I've also put my cell phone number up there, 768-5925. However, you will have to text that one if you have any questions or you would like to join the program. Of course, you can call the station numbers and we'd be happy to interact with you, to talk to you, to listen to your brief comments. And I would also like to say that this program will be posted after on YouTube and also on Facebook. For those of you who do not have the time at this point in time to listen to the entire program, it is posted there for records as well, so that if you know anyone who has a problem with alcoholism or drug addiction, and you would like to refer them to this material, you can go to the program Addiction and Recovery, which is posted on YouTube, and they can also listen to the program. Why I'm saying that is because most people who are addicted to alcohol and drugs and so on, the way they cope with it is by being in denial. They do not want to admit to anyone that they have a problem, that their life is becoming unmanageable. But most of the time they will know, they themselves know that they need to do something about this. Indeed, that was my own case when I was using. But because of pride, I could not seek help. I did not know where to go for help. So this program is about helping people out there who has a problem with any kind of addiction. And the numbers are posted on your program here. You can call at any time. And if you have a question, you can also text. I have a few questions that have come in via the text, and I would respond to them in a minute. So I want to let you know it's an interactive program. I also want to thank the station, Jagriti Television and Radio, for allowing the free use of this media, as a public service to all our listeners in Trinidad, Tobago, and worldwide, where persons who has a problem with substance abuse, alcoholism, drug addiction, they can get information, they can get guidance, they can also use the material as a resource to refer other people to as well. And I do know that a lot of people listen to this program and have been getting help as a result. I also want to thank the people who are in the radio station, in the operating area, Francis in particular, for presenting every week, researching and finding these video material that has a direct bearing on alcoholism, drug addiction, and recovery. As the one presented as the lead up to this program. It is a very valuable resource with very useful information. And of course, it provokes a lot of thinking in people's mind that could lead them to ask questions. Now, I know a lot of listeners, they for fear that their voice might be recognized, they do not want to call the station. So this is why you have that text facility that you can. And I want to let you know, when you ask a question, not only you benefit, but all those people who are listening and who have similar problems and who are sometimes intimidated, by media and so on to call, or for fear that someone will recognize their voice. They all benefit when you ask questions. So again, I want to remind you, the stations up on the screen, the station's number, you can call those, and you can interact live with us here at the station, or you can text the number I have given you there, 768-5925, and we will. So my first questions come from a good friend, Dennis, from Southern Intergroup. And it is a very, very important question. It is a question that is a little bit contentious. And I do pretend, let me say at the outset, to be an authority on this. I'm sure other members of the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous listening can also chime in with their opinion, their views, but please keep it short so that we could allow as many people to participate. But this is a very important question for a lot of people listening out there, because the question is, if recovery is a lifelong ongoing process, how can one be recovered? And this has recently again surfaced as an issue that I'm familiar with in Alcoholics Anonymous. And let me read, it derives its, I would say it derives its content from the foreword to the first edition of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's what is normally referred to as the Big Book. You can't see because of the green screen, but it is the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm reading from the fourth edition of this Big Book, which is the basic text of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's on page 13, and this is the foreword to the first edition of this book. This is the foreword as it appeared in the first printing of the first edition of this book in 1939. And here's what it says. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. For them, we hope these pages will prove so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. We think this account of our experiences will help everyone to better understand the alcoholic. Many do not comprehend that the alcoholic is a very sick person. And besides, we are sure that our way of living has its advantages for all. Now, it is important that we remain anonymous because we are too few or at present to handle the overwhelming number of personal appeals which may result from this publication. Being mostly business or professional folk, we could not well carry on our occupations in such an event. We would like it understood that our alcoholic work is an avocation. When writing or speaking publicly about alcohol, we urge each of our fellowship to omit his personal name, designating himself instead as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Very earnestly, we ask the press also to observe this request, for otherwise we shall be greatly handicapped. We are not an organization in the conventional sense of the word. There are no fees or dues whatsoever. The only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. We are not allied with any particular faith, sect, or denomination, or nor do we oppose anyone. We simply wish to be helpful to those who are afflicted. We shall be interested to hear from those who are getting results from this book, particularly from those who have commenced work with other alcoholics. We should like to be helpful to such cases. Inquiry by scientific, medical, and religious societies are welcomed. Now, remember, this was being written in 1939, or just before that. And it was before the book was published itself. And at that time, I must say, because of having been involved myself in the field of psychiatry, psychiatric social work, as a professional, I am aware that a lot has changed since 1939. I have some knowledge about the history of the development, the medical model, as it were. Because way back in 1939, it still was not accepted that alcoholism is a disease. And as you see in the book, it is said it is a hopeless state of mind and body. Um, there were some work now being presented that indicated that alcoholism was not a bad habit or a matter of judgment or morality, but there was a gradual movement to accepting this as a disease. There were many researchers in the field at that time, Carl Jung, Jelinek, a lot of people who were writing about this. And indeed, our Professor Burban in Trinidad eventually was able to persuade our government to accept here, when he was a senator in government in the 1950s, to accept alcoholism as a disease. So today, fortunately for people like him and others who have written on the subject, we have moved from seeing it as a behavioral problem, as a social issue, to seeing it as a disease, just like like diabetes and hypertension and all of those. So a lot has changed since then when this book was written. And the words precisely how we have covered is now being put in italics in the later editions so that readers will inquire about it and not be moved to think, because a lot of people seeing this continue to say that they have recovered from alcoholism. And that could be a problem for them, because if you ever think that you have fully recovered from alcoholism, the tendency would be to think that you could go back to drinking. And a lot of people have made that mistake to think that they have recovered and that they could go back and take a drink, because for those people who have not accepted, and there's a difference between admitting that you're an alcoholic and accepting. Acceptance comes much later on when there's a further development of insight and understanding, when there's a lot of discussion and experience with listening to other alcoholics, share their experience, strength, and hope as happens in the fellowship. And much later, by practicing the principles of AA, I would say that people gradually, as you sober up, you begin to understand the nature of this illness that is alcoholism. Now, the disease that is alcoholism, one of the symptoms of that disease is drinking alcohol. And that is very important to understand, because there are other symptoms like selfishness, self-centeredness. There are many psychological things that predisposes one to alcoholism. Self-centeredness, egotism, patriotism, dishonesty. All of these are character defects that would set up one eventually to become vulnerable to alcohol. Because the person who is depressed or anxious or irritated or self-centered, egotistical, and is always on that swing from you're feeling extremely elated or becoming depressed, between these extremes of emotions, is much more vulnerable to taking that drink to help them to cope when they are in the doldrums, when they are depressed, when they are so irritated and can't cope with it. So that stopping the drink by using the formula as is suggested by AA, avoiding the first drink one day at a time, yes, it will keep a person abstinent. But now, if I could go back into, my own experience with working with alcoholics, a lot of people who eventually presented themselves as full-blown alcoholics would have started taking their drink out of curiosity. And remember, we are living in a society here where you do not have to have you don't have to search for a reason to take a drink. We are a very, very, I would say, a society that is very, very much predisposed to drinking. If somebody died, we take in a drink for that. If it's Christmas, we take in a drink for that. If they're getting married, we taking a drink for that. So that we are carnival, you name it. Every celebration is punctuated with a drink. In fact, if the sun is too hot, we take a drink for that too. And if the rain is falling like these days, that would be sufficient reason to take a drink. And for some, Well, if they are bored, they take a drink. And for most, eventually, after drinking for some time and becoming psychologically dependent and physically dependent and chemically dependent on the substances, then because of withdrawal, when you stop taking it, you go into what is called withdrawal, which could become very severe. And because of that, a lot of people now, their drinking and drug use is perpetuated. So although they may have started to use it out of curiosity, the fact is when the body has become physically dependent on the alcohol, now they can't eat if they don't take a drink. They can't sleep if they don't take a drink. They become very depressed when they don't take a drink. They become very irritable, when they don't take that drink or that smoke. So that the person who in recovery, if he or she does not learn new coping skills, how to deal with happiness, how to deal with sorrow, how to deal with disappointment, and if that same person, after they stop drinking, do not get help to deal with the withdrawal, the physical withdrawal symptoms of alcohol, which could last for quite a while. For alcohol, it could last a shorter while than it is for the other psychotropic drugs like cocaine and marijuana and all of those. Because psychological dependence can last for a lifetime. And this is why using the word recovered to say that I have recovered from alcoholism or drug addiction could give the impression that you're cured. Now, once a person understands it and they are not cured, it doesn't matter what they say. But they, in sometimes in telling other people that you have recovered, could communicate to them that, look, I have been cured. And if any alcoholic or drug addict ever believe who has crossed that imaginary borderline from social drinking to compulsive drinking, then too many, hundreds and thousands of people have tried to reverse back that, to go back to social drinking with disastrous results. Fatal. Many an alcoholic or drug addict ended up either in a mental institution or in the cemetery because they thought they could go back to social drinking or social usage of some of these other addictive drugs like cocaine and marijuana and LSD and so on. So that, yes, a person can, of course, it's the individual right to speak and act and think as they wish. However, it is that same thinking that led one in the first place to becoming alcoholic and drug addict, and it kept perpetuating their addiction, so that one has to abandon that. I know in AA they call it the stinking thinking. And that's why there's a whole slogan, that you need to think, because that is where the action starts. It's the root, the basis of action is your thoughts. First you think it, then you do it. So that once this thinking starts to come back, then you're putting yourself at risk. So it is safe. It is my own belief, and of course is my opinion. It is safe for a person who is in recovery to never think that they are cured, that it is a work in progress. Indeed, I am also, as a person in recovery, I I I stay sober one day at a time. I get up in the morning, I pray, I ask God to help me to stay sober. However, you pray to God as though everything depends on God, but you still have to work as though everything depends on you. So I stay away from drinking situations and events and all of that. Although I get invited, I used to get invited a lot in the old days, but now a lot of people who know that I don't drink, they don't invite me, and I don't mind, because when I'm there in that occasion, I stick out like a sore thumb. And I can make other people uncomfortable who will want to take a drink. So that I mean, to each his own, and No one can tell a person what, especially in Alcoholics Anonymous, nobody can tell anyone what to say and how to act and so on. In fact, the rule in A is that there are no rules. Nobody can't punish you. Nobody can expel you from Alcoholics Anonymous. And if you want to say that you have recovered, well, that's up to you. But if, however, you ever go to think that you're cured, then you're putting yourself at risk. So I have two questions coming in. What can you say to encourage someone in recovery? Well, one of the first things is I would suggest is that the same way friends can encourage a person to drink, friends can encourage you to stay sober. Meaning now that one has stopped drinking, I even remember in my days, I would never really drink alone. I have not reached that. Although I know people who drink alone at home and get drunk, because now they don't have a good supply of alcohol or drugs, so that they don't have enough to share, and they need it, so they're very, very stingy with their supply. I will stay home and drink or smoke and all that kind of thing. But generally, most people would have been a member of a group. And like I remember, I never smoked cigarette. But with some friends in South, I am from Gandhi Village originally. A group of us went to what we call in New River, which is near Harbhajan Hill. And one of my friends had a cigarette he stole from his father's pack. And of course, he took it out, and everybody was curious because none of us were smokers. But he had done it a few times. I wouldn't call his name. And he lit it up and took two pull. And of course, all of us, out of curiosity, wanted to have that experience because remember, we're seeing all the adults doing this. And one of the motivational factor, very powerful motivational factor in young children is to become adults. We want to be like them. We want to be like our father. We want to be like our role models in the community. I couldn't wait to wear long pants and have the same privileges like adult. So here was an opportunity to have an experience that was only um, recused for them, you know, so that I take a pull. Of course, I nearly coughed my head off, but that did not stop me. I wanted to show that I could do it just like the others and pull the cigarette without coughing. That is one of the things, the powerful nature of peer pressure. We want, in the young group, we challenge each other unconsciously to see who will climb higher in the tree, who would jump over the wall, who would swim to the deepest part of the river. We are always doing this, and it is a good thing in that each one of us become better and better at what we are doing. But so too when it comes to the negative things. I didn't want to be less than anyone else. I wanted to be able to pull a cigarette and not cough. And so eventually I was able to do it, you know. And so too with the drinking. you know, as a teenager, we would go to I remember I was part of a gym, a group. We did exercise in the gym and wrestling and boxing and all those things. But the same group would do a lot of other things like, okay, we'd go on hikes, we'd go on camping trips, which were good things. We formed a little group to practice music. We had a little group that we we started a little village council in Gandhi village, and we learned how to conduct meetings and to write minutes. And we had a little music group, as I said. But the same group had one or two of us who wanted to grow up much faster than we could, and so we would buy a beer and see who could drink it in one go. And eventually, I was able to do that as well. So that these are things, even though I grew up in a very, very, I would say, safe community where it was predominantly Indians and Hindus, and there was a lot of respect from people for one another. You can't have, get have You couldn't allow an adult to see you smoking a cigarette or drinking a beer. He didn't have to wait to report to you to your parents. He would deal with you immediately. You'd get a few clouds or something. You understand? So even in spite of all of that, it didn't stop a lot of us from becoming alcoholics eventually. Because once you have the genetic predisposition and you start drinking out, most people start out of curiosity and because of peer pressure. Eventually, immediately, you learn, like I did. I remember being part of a group that was a little small in orchestra, in drum, organ, dantal, and so on. And we got a job to play music at a farewell in La Romaine. And when we went there, it was the first time I was going to hold a mic to sing, and I was trembling. And one of the older members of the group called me to the back and gave me a good shot of strong rum. And when I went up there, I was only supposed to sing one song, but I sang two and was getting ready to sing three until they had to escort me off. And I never forgot that experience. It was the first time I felt so brave. I was not intimidated at all. And this is only my experience, but I'm sure a lot of young people have had similar experiences with alcohol, and they find useful utilitarian purposes for it. Eventually, this is what would lead to a dependence, a psychological dependence on the drug. And this is why I'm saying, coming back to our original question, you are never totally recovered because you can't go back and drink safely. There are so many people who attempted to do that. They thought they had recovered. There's a story in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous of a man who had stayed bone dry for 25 years, became very successful in business, and thought that he had recovered. Now he could go back, and now he had retired, he had all this money, and out came the the bathroom robe and the slippers, and thought, well, now I could take a drink and enjoy myself. And within a short period, he was back in the hospital, sick, and eventually he died because it's a strange phenomenon with alcoholism and drug addiction that even though a person has stopped drinking, the disease that is alcoholism, if not attended to, that is all the psychological symptoms I identify, the selfishness, the self-centeredness, the dishonesty, if those things are not attended to, those are all symptoms of the disease. And if you do not attend to them by going to meetings, for instance, being in a recovery program, your sobriety is precarious. Eventually, you will relapse. You know, now, a lot of people, I know there are few people here and there who have stopped drinking on their own because they had some crisis and they had to stop because maybe they ended up in court or they ended up in prison or they have some serious health condition and the doctors say you must stop or you're going to die. So they have stopped and they brandish that to say, well, look, I didn't have to go to AA meetings or go to anybody else. I stopped. Well, yes, but there are very, very few people who could do that. And every one of us would like to be like that, not have to depend on anybody else to support us. Remember, we were fed on a diet of self-sufficiency by our parents from childhood, by our elders, always egging us on that, look, man, you could do that. You don't need no help. You could climb, you could run, you could do this, you could achieve that. So we always, for our entire life, are trying to prove that we are independent and we are self-sufficient. Here comes alcoholism, and we have a trouble now admitting that we can't deal with it. It has us over the barrel, as it were. And a lot of people will struggle with that, trying to control it into the gates of hell and insanity. And still, they'll die, but they will not admit that they can't handle it. Because it takes a lot of humility. It is ego deflating. But for those who are listening to this program, if you have that ability to be honest and realize, look, hey, how many times I told myself, I just going for one drink. and ended up drunk. How many times I tell myself, I am not drinking for this whole week or next week or because I have a prayers or something, only to end up drinking before that. How many times you said, look, I'm just going to take one drink. I remember I used to tell my wife, take out my food. I just go for a drink and come back. And the food would remain there. And I would get drunk and I come home and eat and can't remember the next day until she showed me the plate and said, but you eat. And I would say, no. You understand? So, in spite of all of that, the fact is, this is a disease that could be arrested. It is never cured. Too many people, and people still continue to see if they could go back to social drinking because they enjoy it, only to find that they end up again the same way. A lot of people have gone back to change their drink, change their friends, do geographical changes, migrate, only to find no matter where you go in the world, alcohol is alcohol. It's the same alcohol. You'll find it doesn't matter what the label on the bottle says, whether it is beer, whether it is scotch, whether it is rum, whether it is vodka, the alcohol is the same and it will get you drunk. Once you're alcoholic and you take that first drink, and as I say that, let me make it quite clear. A social drinker is a person who could take one or two drinks, even pour a third drink, and not even bother with it and walk away. Now, an alcoholic may probably do that to prove something. But generally speaking, people who are social drinkers, they could take one drink and it wouldn't bother them. Or they could go to a party and not even bother to take a drink. But alcoholics may also go to the party, not take a drink. But the minute they take one drink, that is the trouble. Once they take one drink, it's as though it wakes up some kind of demon inside of them. A genie or something that asks for more and more and more. And they eventually, if everything is equal, they have enough money and the drink is available, they'll drink to get drunk, in spite of everything. And so, you brothers and sisters who are listening out there or following this program, if this has happened, you tell yourself, I just going for one, or I told myself, I'm not going to drink until so and so time, only to find you went and got drunk before that, then you need to seriously look at yourself. You know, Alcoholics Anonymous has something called a pamphlet called Who Me. You can't see it on this because of the green screen, but it has a question sign on it that can help anyone. It has helped millions of people worldwide to determine whether they are social drinkers or alcoholics. And once you determine you're an alcoholic, that is not a life sentence, although you may not be cured for the rest of your life. But many, many alcoholics worldwide have been able to arrest their alcoholism, doing it by avoiding the first drink one day at a time. So I would like to encourage anyone listening this program. Of course, you can call me at 671-3040 after the program if you do not wish to call the program itself, or text. I see I have another question here, but let me just answer this one. You can call and you can get information as to where you can get help, how you can determine whether you're an alcoholic or not. And if you're an alcoholic, as I said, it's not a life sentence. You can live with alcoholism just like I am living with my alcoholism. I have been able to stay sober for 40 years, and I'll just check it on my phone here. It is 40 years, 6 months, and 9 days today that I'm sober. So I go back to your questions. I have another question here that says, do interventions work, or can it make it worse for an addict? Well, interventions do work. Not all interventions. Not all in the same intervention may not work with every person. For different people, like they say, different stroke for different folks. There are some people who will go to AA or NA, and they are able to stay sober from the first instance. However, there are many people who go to AA and NA begrudgingly because the court referred them there, or family members force them or threaten them, and they end up going to the meeting. And they're there just to satisfy the requirement, to get their little accreditation, to get back their license from the courthouse and so on, or to get off the hook for domestic violence or whatever reason. A lot of people come in the first instance, but they don't quite believe that they're an alcoholic, and that is all right. But by attending meetings, they realize, but wait, you know, I thought it was only me who suffered like that. I didn't realize there are other people who are going through the same thing. And that is what helps a lot of people to identify and eventually stay in the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous and stay sober. But then there are some people who go and say, no, that never happened with me, or that never happened to me. I don't belong here. This is only for old people. And, I've heard all kinds of excuses people have given me working in this field, only to realize that they are in denial still. And for some of these, they have to go back and, as we say, suffer a little bit more. They go back and drink, and every time you go back and drink, it becomes worse, because alcoholism is a disease. It, even when you stop drinking, it is still progressing. Some people have described it, in recovery circles as a man cutting a piece of wood with a saw. They have the hand saw that we use a long time. And it's like he reached about halfway, and it's lunchtime and he takes a break. He goes have lunch and then come back. When he come back, he's not going to take out the saw from there and put it in a fresh place and start all over again. He'll continue from where it was. However, with alcoholism and drug addiction, it's like somebody else came and was working the saw while he was having lunch, because the disease is still progressing while you stop the drinking or the drug. Because when the symptoms are selfishness, self-centeredness, irritability, and those emotional states, a person can stop drinking, and if he does not attend to his selfishness and egotism and all of that, it can become worse. The person who, as an alcoholic, his family might still be able to steal a few dollars from his pocket when he's drunk. Now that he's sober, you can't get a penny from him. Some people describe the recovering person, his hands become tight as the bark of a tree. You can't even get a penny from this man now. Now he's only finding fault. Why this cop there? Why only didn't sweep the house? And he could become a terror to live with if he's not on a program of recovery and attending to the other symptoms of his disease, the selfishness, the self-centeredness, the unreasonableness, all of those things that attend and develop after you start using drugs. So interventions, yes. The question is, do interventions work, and can it make it worse for an addict? Well, interventions, if professionally done, I have seen a lot of interventions work. And as we speak about interventions, I know that a lot of spouses would like to get help for their husband, wife especially. It's even harder when the wife is the alcoholic for the husband to get them to go seek help, because most of our treatment facilities are tended towards dealing with the male alcoholic. You know, there now, I must say, we are fortunate in Trinidad. We have two treatment facilities that are designed for women. One is at Serenity Place in Cochrane Village, going to Point 14, Guapo, that is run by Miss Beverly Morrison, a very good friend of mine who's doing yeoman service there. And then the New Life Ministries do have a branch now in Santa Flora for female addicts and alcoholics. But generally, a lot of people, you know, one of the effective interventions can be done, and it has been done, is by employers. Sometime when the wife threatened the alcoholic, I will leave you if you don't do something about your drinking. I don't bother him. In fact, he would be happy if she left, because he'd be more free to drink. But when the employer said, look, I'm going to cut your supply line, you're going to lose your job. Most alcoholics and drug addicts listen to that. Also now, the police, through the breathalyzer program, have become very effective in saving a lot of people's lives. When the police stop you for drinking or drunken driving, breathalyze you and tell you, look, put you before the court, the magistrate says, look, you either go do something about your drinking, or you're going to go to jail and lose your license. They listen. And this is how a lot of people are coming to Alcoholics Anonymous now, because they want to get back their license. And nothing is wrong with that. It doesn't matter how a person presents and whether they are motivated or not. The important thing is that they come to Cora, they come to AA. Their responsibility now lies with the members of the AA group to help that person, welcome them, make it comfortable for them, help them to understand the nature of the disease, that it is not a bad habit, it's not a social stigmatized issue, it is really an illness. And, you know, offer sponsorship to them so that they can get questions answered. So too at Cora, the professionals there, they are well trained, they are experienced. If you have a problem with alcoholism, these would be the places to go. To go to New Life Ministries, Rebirth House, Heal House. We are fortunate to have all of these voluntary organizations that are there. I have worked in places in the world. In Jamaica, for instance, when I was there in 1983, there were no treatment facilities. If you had a problem with alcohol and drug addiction, you had to go to the Ward 1 of the mental hospital at UC Hospital. There was only two AA groups at the time in the whole of Jamaica. Now there are much more AA groups, and the AA fraternity has spread over many of the Caribbean islands, and indeed in Trinidad and Tobago. We have almost 120 odd groups of Alcoholics Anonymous groups. In my community where I live, we have 5 groups that meet on on Sundays. There's a group at the Mahasabha School at 6 o'clock. There's one at the Presbyterian School on Monday at 7. There's also another one on Wednesday in the farmlands in Felicity. There's another one on Friday night at the Mahasabha School again, and one on Saturday night at the Presbyterian School. So in this community, there's 5 groups. And if anyone would like to get any further information about where the groups are, you can call me at 671-3040 after the meeting. I'll give you the information. And if anyone would, of course, there's a lot of private practitioners today who are there for those people who can't get admission to the hospital, who can't, who don't want to go to public institutions or AA and so on. You can go to private practitioners like myself if you have a problem with alcohol and drug addiction. So I want to thank all those people who called. I think, do we have a caller on the line, Francis? Hello?
Yes, hello, morning.
Good morning.
Well, I can hardly hear you, but if you are hearing me,
I'm hearing you.
Listened to the program, and you mentioned precarious sobriety, and
Yeah.
I have to step out for a minute. Could you probably expand more on that for me? I would listen off air.
Yes, the thing is, a person who has become dependent on alcohol is, remember, we are not drinking it because we like the taste. Alcohol don't taste good. We were using it in order to help us to cope with life, to feel better about ourselves, to relieve anxiety. Some of us have eventually become so dependent that we have to take it in order to be able to sleep. Then the next day we have to take it in order to prevent the shakes. Some of us have reached to the stage where we start hallucinating and all of that. So that for those people who just want to do this cold turkey and do it on their own without any help, their sobriety can become very precarious. That is, it could be very easy to relapse, because if you have not attended to the other basic underpinnings, the depression and the anxiety and the irritability and all of those things, and the issues that are derived from being selfish and self-centered and so on, the anger problems and all of that, then it is very easy for that kind of person to relapse, because that is what the mind knows. In the old days, the first thing that comes to mind, when I get upset, take a drink. That's how I used to cope. So this is why going to the program helps the person to learn new coping skills. that they are able to deal with those problems now without having to take a drink. So I want to thank all those people who sent in questions. I may not have been able to answer all of them in this program, but I want to encourage all our listeners out there. If you have questions, even during the week, you can send it to 768-5925. You can text it to my number there, and I will respond to it on Thursdays when I come to the program. And for those people, I can even give you credit for the question that you're sending in, because a lot of people feel intimidated to call directly, like our last caller. I want to thank him for raising that. I'm sorry we are running out on time. We have to wrap up now, but I would have liked to deal with that question a little more in detail. But yes, for people who are not attending meetings and who are not in a support group, their sobriety can become very precarious. So I want to thank all of you who called, who sent in your text messages, and all of you who are listening. Again, I want to invite you to come on again next week, Thursday. Get your questions ready, and I would make every attempt. If I can't answer it, I'm sure there are other listeners who are listening who would chime in and maybe give you response to the question that you are raising. I want to thank Radio and TV Jagriti providing this airtime and television time free of charge to our nation, uh, to all our listeners, so that they can all benefit from this program. Thank you all very much. Yes, sir.